Hey guys. Hi. Here's Coco. Say hi, Coco. Hi, I'm taking a nap in the sunlight. Hey. Okay, I'm going to continue reading The Landlady. What do you guys think of it so far? A little creepy, a little weird. Don't really know what's going on. Some of you already finished. So I'm going to start again at the top of page 28, if you can follow along. So where we had left off was she had just left him alone in his room on the second floor, I believe. He has the room all to himself. She had this hot water bottle in his bed for him. It was like already like she was waiting for someone to come. All right, gonna put it down now. Now, the fact that this landlady appeared to be slightly off her rocker didn't worry Billy in the least. After all, she was not only harmless, there was no question about that, but she was also quite obviously a kind and generous soul. He guessed that she had probably lost a son in the war or something like that and had never gotten over it. So a few minutes later, after unpacking his suitcase and washing his hands, he trotted downstairs to the ground floor and entered the living room. His landlady wasn't there, but the fire was glowing in the hearth, and the little dachshund was still sleeping soundly in front of it. The room was wonderfully warm and cozy. I'm a lucky fellow, he thought, rubbing his hands. This was a bit of all right. So there's a fire going in the fireplace. The little dog is curled up on the floor. It's all warm and cozy. He found the guest book lying open on the piano, so he took out his pen and wrote down his name and address. There were only 2 other entries above his on the page, and as the one always does with guest books, he started to read them. One was Christopher Mulholland from Cardiff. The other was Gregory W. Temple from Bristol. That's funny, he thought suddenly. Christopher Mulholland. It rings a bell. Now, where on earth had he heard that rather unusual name before? Was it a boy at school? No. Was it one of his sister's numerous young men, perhaps, or a friend of his father's? No, it wasn't any of those. He glanced down again at the book. Okay, so there's only 2 other names, and he recognizes one of the names. What are your thoughts at this point? Why would he recognize a name from this book in a town that he doesn't live in? Okay, Christopher Mulholland, 231 Cathedral Road, Cardiff. Gregory W. Temple, 27 Sycamore Drive, Bristol. As a matter of fact, now he came to think of it, he wasn't at all sure that the second name didn't have almost as much of a familiar ring about it as the first. Gregory Temple, he said aloud, searching his memory. Christopher Mulholland. Such charming boys, a voice behind him answered, and he turned and saw his landlady sailing into the room with a large silver tea tray in her hands. She was holding it well out in front of her, and rather high up, as though the tray were a pair of reins on a frisky horse. They sound familiar, he said. They do. How interesting. I'm almost positive I've heard those names before somewhere. Isn't that odd? Maybe it was in the newspapers. They weren't famous in any way, were they? I mean, famous cricketers or footballers or something like that. So he's still trying to figure out where these names came from. The landlady remembers these boys. She says they're charming. Famous, she said, setting the tea tray down on the low table in front of the sofa. Oh no, I don't think they were famous, but they were incredibly handsome, both of them. I can promise you that. They were tall and young and handsome, my dear, just exactly like you. Once more, Billy glanced down at the book. Look here, he said, noticing the dates. The last entry is over 2 years old. It is? Yes, indeed. And Christopher Mulholland's is nearly a year before that. More than 3 years ago. Dear me, she said, shaking her head and heaving a dainty little sigh. I would never have thought it. How time does fly from us all, doesn't it, Mr. Wilkins? It's Weaver, Billy said. W-E-A-V-E-R. Oh, of course it is, she cried, sitting down on the sofa. How silly of me. I do apologize. In one ear and out the other. That's me, Mr. Weaver. Okay, so he's like, both of these names sound familiar. He asks if they're famous. She says they're not, but they're both handsome. These entries are really old. No one has stayed in this place for a long time. So, why do you think that is? And what does Billy Weaver have in common with these two other people who have been in the house before? Okay, gonna keep going. Oh, of course it is, she cried, sitting down on the sofa. How silly of me. I do apologize. Oh, I read that already. You know something, Billy said. Something that's really quite extraordinary about all of this? No, dear, I don't. Well, you see, both of these names, Mulholland and Temple, I not only seem to remember each one of them separately, so to speak, but somehow or other, in some peculiar way, they both appear to be sort of connected together as well, as though they were both famous for the same sort of thing, if you see what I mean. Like Dempsey and Tooney, for example, or Churchill and Roosevelt. Okay, so you probably don't know who those people are, but it would be saying like Mickey Mouse and Minnie Mouse, or I can't even think of two people who go together right now. Or like Rihanna and Drake. I don't know. But the names like fit together. How amusing, she said. But come over here now, dear, and sit down beside me on the sofa, and I'll give you a nice cup of tea and a ginger biscuit before you go to bed. You really shouldn't bother, Billy said. I didn't mean you to do anything like that. He stood by the piano, watching her as she fussed about with the cups and saucers. He noticed that she had small, white, quickly moving hands and red fingernails. Red fingernails. Creepy. I'm almost positive it was in the newspapers I saw them, Billy said. I'll think of it in a second. I'm sure I will. There's nothing more tantalizing than a thing like this that lingers just outside the border of one's memory. He hated to give up. You guys know what that's like when you're thinking of something and you're like, it's on the tip of my tongue, but I can't get it. Now, wait a minute, he said. Just wait a minute. Mulholland. Christopher Mulholland. Wasn't that the name of the Eton schoolboy who was on a walking tour through the West Country and then all of a sudden, ... Milk, she said, and sugar? Yes, please. And then all of a sudden, Eton schoolboy, she said. Oh, no, my dear, that can't possibly be right, because my Mr. Mulholland was certainly not an Eton schoolboy when he came to me. He was a Cambridge undergraduate. Come over here now and sit next to me and warm yourself in front of this lovely fire. Come on, your tea's all ready for you. She patted the empty place beside her on the sofa, and she sat there smiling at Billy and waiting for him to come over. Why do you think the landlady keeps interrupting him? He's trying to get out this thought about this Eton schoolboy and who Christopher Mulholland is, and he's starting to talk about something that happened to him suddenly, and then she just cuts him off. Why would she do that? Okay, I am going to stop there, and then you can answer the questions on your document.